Hi guys, well today I'm going to be counting down my top 10 best things about Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. Now let me start off by saying this is my favourite trilogy of all time, and these films have impacted me on why I love movies so much. So without further ado, let's get started. In 1997 the Batman saga seemed to jump the shark when George Clooney donned the Batsuit in his critically rivaled film Batman and Robin. After 4 films in that series featuring 3 different actors as the Caped Crusader, the franchise seemed to have nowhere to go. It was difficult to imagine that then Batman would be soon revitalised in a series of films that were both commercially successful and critically praised. It all changed in 2005 when Christian Bale put on the suit, Christopher Nolan stood behind the camera, and a new franchise was born with Batman Begins. Now it's hard, especially for young people, to imagine Batman's movies without Nolan behind the camera. 7 years after Begins hit theatres, the trilogy reached its inevitable conclusion with the release of The Dark Knight Rises. With that in mind, let's get started with the top 10 best things about this unforgettable trilogy of films. Number 10. The relationships. Batman would not have been such a successful hero if it weren't for his trio of allies who have looked out for him, sometimes begrudgingly throughout the series. Those allies were Lucius Fox, Alfred Pennyworth and Jim Gordon. The relationships that Wayne shared with each of these characters helped him become an unlikely hero. From Gordon's trust in him in Batman Begins to Fox's support for him despite their ethical disagreements in The Dark Knight to Alfred's affection for him in The Dark Knight Rises, these characters prove that the Caped Crusader couldn't be a hero without having his friends stand by him. Although none of these characters were ever the main focus of the story, their supporting turns provided much of the series' heart. Of course, these characters were created by strong actors who allowed them to serve an equal strong purpose throughout the trilogy. Number 9. The special effects. Now in a superhero film about crime, villains and justice, you've got to have some good set pieces. And in order to do this, you've got to include some good special effects, especially during the action sequences. And in all 3 films, Nolan proved up to the task. The explosions and the effects in these movies never felt over the top and obnoxious. They were often sometimes more restrained and powerful than the effects in other similar films. With the bridge explosion in The Dark Knight Rises, for instance, the effect wasn't to blow up the bridge in a flashy Michael Bay style. The explosion was more subtle and clear, making it far less cartoonish and far more realistic. Such effects help the destruction that occurs in all 3 films more sobering than they would have been otherwise. Number 8. The boldness. I must say, when watching The Dark Knight for the first time in 2008, one scene that really got to me was Rachel's death. It was a very dark scene and really pushed the limits of the film's 12 certificate rating, very closely bordering on a 15. Many people, including myself, have noted how shocking Rachel Dawes' death was in The Dark Knight. Dawes, an important supporting player in the first 2 films, was Bruce Wayne's on-again, off-again love interest. Few writers would dare to kill off such a character, and even fewer would dare to do it in the middle of the movie. But The Dark Knight showed that the filmmakers were willing to do anything to tell a good story. It was hard not to be surprised when Dawes was killed, but it was difficult not to be impressed with how Nolan used the tragedy to transform both Dent and Wayne into even more troubled individuals. Number 7. The themes. Superhero movies are often seen as popcorn flicks. Viewers enter the theatre to be entertained, and a great hit superhero film can do that. But Nolan's Batman films were deeper and more thoughtful than that. Each of them were entertaining, but the movies spoke to something much deeper about human spirit. They struggled with profound themes such as heroism, honour and integrity. District Attorney Harvey Dent was a prime example of this. A public icon who stood for clean streets and ethical superiority became a vengeful monster when Rachel was murdered. After his death, Dent's legacy was maintained by those who thought to serve a greater good. The idea of hiding the truth about a political icon in order to maintain public moral while undermining a true hero's innocence was a final example of how Nolan's films took a deeper concepts and made them a core part of the franchise. Number 6. The acting. From Batman Begins onward, it was hard not to be impressed by the A-list cast that Nolan brought to the series. Morgan Freeman and Michael Caine, 2 Oscar-winning actors known for long and brilliant careers, accepted small roles in all 3 films, playing a technological genius, Lucius Fox, and a butler, Alfred Pennyworth, respectively. Nolan was lucky to get a leading man like Christian Bale, one of my favourite actors of all time, a highly acclaimed character actor who won an Oscar for his performance in The Fighter. Also on board for the entire series was acclaimed Gary Oldman, who played the small but pivotal role of Commissioner Gordon, Batman's unlikely ally. There were dozens of other highly acclaimed actors who took on the roles of the series, including Liam Neeson, Tom Wilkinson, Heath Ledger, Aaron Eckhart, Maggie Gyllenhaal, Tom Hardy, Anne Hathaway, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and Marion Cotillard. It's hard to argue with a cast like that, and many of actors delivered some of the best performances of their career. Number 5. The main character. Now, if you don't like the main character in a film, then you're going to have a problem with the entire film. Mercifully, Bruce Wayne is a flawed but self-sacrificing character at the heart of the franchise, and is a complex and deep character, and Nolan's films presented him as the type of hero he was born to be. With superhero films, viewers are often presented with noble good guys fighting crazy bad guys to save the world, but Wayne's mission was far more interesting than that. He was simply a scarred young man hoping to avenge the brutal murder of his parents. The feelings of insecurity and the loss associated with the traumatic event led him to don a mask in order to protect Gotham from the thieves and monsters who threatened it. Even while he wore the cape and cowl, he was still a reluctant hero in The Dark Knight who found belief in the fact that a politician represented to Gotham a new breed of hero who didn't need to wear a mask in order to create order in the city. Those hopes faded, but the idea that Wayne wasn't a typical hero never did. Number 4. The villains. One of the greatest things about this entire franchise was the Oscar-worthy performance from Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight. The Joker was portrayed convincingly by Jack Nicholson in Tim Burton's 1989 Batman movie, but Ledger took the character to a whole new level, replacing Nicholson's manic character with a psychopath intent on showing the darkness that lies in each of us. Ledger posthumously won the Academy Award for his brilliant performance and created one of the greatest cinematic villains that ever existed. Of course, Liam Neeson and Tom Hardy took respective turns as the murderous thugs in Batman Begins and The Dark Knight Rises, and both created solid characters, but it was Ledger's performance alone that created a new breed of cinematic villains. Number 3. The conclusion. Now, for me, the conclusion is one of the most important parts of a film/series, and the last thing you want is to make a great series of films and sign off on a negative note. The Dark Knight trilogy does not fall into that category. The Dark Knight Rises ends with one of the most satisfying ways in film. The Dark Knight Rises was unfortunately Christopher Nolan's final Batman film. The director had proclaimed repeatedly that this was going to be his final film about the Caped Crusader, and even penned a goodbye letter to the series. In The Dark Knight Rises, that decision was made clear. Nolan just wasn't making the film in order to end his partnership with the franchise. He made it to end his franchise completely and on a positive note. Without spoiling anything, The Dark Knight Rises focuses a lot on the ideas and characters that were presented in the first film. Seeing Batman Begins and its sequel beforehand is necessary to appreciate the third film for what it is, the final chapter in a well-plotted trilogy. Not only did Nolan wrap up Batman's story, he used the final movie to question many of the actions in the earlier films, leaving viewers to remember how well these chapters work together as a complete series. Number 2. The tone. For me, the Dark Knight trilogy got the tone dead on. It knew what it wanted to be from the get-go, and the tone of the film arguably makes it the best comic book films ever made. Many of the previous Batman films were dark affairs. Tim Burton films presented Gotham as a cold, dark town with seedy characters and an ugly underbelly, but Nolan films took the darkness even deeper. However, never descending into silliness or caricature, these movies maintained a serious tone even though other superhero movies offered a more light-hearted approach. Nolan understood the idea of Batman and associated it with the story of a man who witnessed his parents get murdered and sought vengeance against his city's criminals' masterminds. These Batman movies were in complete contrast to other comic book movies like the Avengers and the Spider-Man films, which are good in their own right, but the Batman films succeeded despite offering up stories and issues that were far more serious in nature. So what's going to be number 1 then? Well, in my opinion, the thing that made the Dark Knight trilogy so amazing was the direction. I mean, without Christopher Nolan, these films wouldn't even exist, and if they were remade, then they wouldn't have been half as good without Christopher Nolan behind the camera. Nolan is an intriguing and imaginative director. In movies like Memento and Insomnia, he told complex stories with strong, thoughtful characters, despite using some of the same concepts in his films. Nolan's movies are always worth talking about and debating. So there you go guys, that is my list for what I think are the top 10 best things about the Dark Knight trilogy. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to comment down below what you think makes this trilogy so good, or what you think the trilogy did wrong. I'd love to know, guys, and yeah, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you later.